Hey everyone, welcome to M4G Advocacy Media. We're live now. I'm Mark.
Hi, I'm Crystal.
And we're here with Mandy and Mary and Court. We'll go through introductions a bit, but welcome. And we're doing Under the Surface today, where we're discussing disability, gratitude as it relates to the disability community. So why don't we just start off with some introductions briefly, if everyone wants to do that? I guess, Anne, you can go first.
Okay. I'm Ann Crow, and I have, for the last 6 years, been dealing with Parkinson's disease. Probably had it for a while before that, but I was diagnosed 6 years ago. And soon after I was diagnosed, I started boxing with Rocksteady Boxing, and that was of tremendous help to me. I'd always been very sedentary, and it helped me so much that I even got my sense of smell back because of the new neural pathways that were being formed in my brain from the kind of activity I was doing. And 18 months after I started Rocksteady Boxing, I became a Rocksteady Boxing coach. And I've been doing that ever since.
Court, you can go next.
No, thank you. I'm Court Schneider. I have been in higher education and disability as an advocate for people with disabilities for almost a decade and a half now. I also teach classes currently. I'm at the University of Richmond. I was born with cerebral palsy, so I'm disabled since birth and going through that journey constantly.
Mandy, I'm trying to go in alphabetical order, and I'm like reading.
Hey, I'm Mandy, and I have been disabled. I've accrued things since 2008. So I became partially paralyzed in my right leg in 2015. Chronic depression, anxiety, PTSD, and then I was in a motorhome wreck in 2019, which started post-concussive disorder. And then I also have had 2 different cancers. So I had papillary thyroid cancer and something called a paraganglioma, which attacks my endocrine system. And so it makes my blood sugars insanely high, as well as my blood pressure. So I'm on like 26 different medications right now, and was recently put on full-time disability. So still learning how to be able to work a little bit and not and work with my disabilities at the same time. So
And Mary?
I'm Mary Collins, and I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, MS, in 1995 when I was 36. And I had a kind of unusual experience because in my 20s, I had been a live in non medical aid to someone with MS. So I had no prior knowledge of it, but when I was diagnosed, I had the advantage of some experience and sort of thinking, what would I do if something like this happened to me? So I'm really fortunate that I don't have any noticeable or significant disabilities, except this afternoon I was remembering again a little bit about fatigue. And like Anne, I have used exercise, and particularly hiking outdoors and other forms of exercise, to really help me be able to continue to function. Um, so I've never declared myself as a disabled person. I continue to either work or sometimes homemaker mom and other things that take a lot of energy too. So, but I have had over the years many clients before my own diagnosis who were working through an agency to get, again, non-medically trained help. And so I got to experience a lot of different people's situations, and I feel have a lot more understanding and compassion for how it is to navigate through life with a disability.
Okay, Crystal, do we have to? I don't know if we have to introduce ourselves. Or should- yeah. Um. Yeah. Maybe we should just jump right into it. Um. So this is kind of a different conversation. I mean, if you look up gratitude on, I mean, rightfully so, we should all be grateful for things, and we're not trying to express that that isn't necessary. It totally is, but at the same time, um, some of us have experienced things where, um, you know, pe- we can be grateful for something, or people do stuff to help us, and but at the same time it can be invalidating or something like that. Does anyone want to speak to, I mean, you don't have to get too personal here or anything, but does anyone want to speak about that?
Sure. I mean, I can start. I think for me, the biggest thing with gratitude, I think it is important to show gratitude, but one of the things that happens to individuals just with disabilities, and I have no doubt that everyone on this panel has experienced this, is that people do things for you without asking you if you actually need that thing done. And so for me, one of the big things is, did you actually ask me if I needed the assistance, or did you just assume that I needed it? I mean, I always say, like, I run on crutches, and the number of times in my life that people will want to, like, lead me across the street or try to help me when I'm working out. I don't need that kind of assistance, right? So I think one of the big things, the first step for gratitude for me is, like, did you ask before you actually started helping? And that would be one of my big things that I would tell my able-bodied allies. Make sure that you ask before you help rather than just helping, because the other thing is, sometimes, like, if I fall, people want to help me up, but I have a very specific way that I stand up, and sometimes them pulling me up or pulling me a certain way isn't actually helpful like they think it is, because they don't understand. So I think the biggest thing is not to not help, but to ask before you do it. And I think that's one of the big things that, is always a struggle when we get the help and we didn't ask for it, and therefore it's not all that helpful. And then people want you to show gratitude, but you're sort of annoyed because it made something harder that didn't have to be harder. It's always a tough thing to navigate, I think.
Anybody else? Anne?
I once saw an absolutely wonderful therapist who happened to be blind. And after not too long of working together, she said to me, people are generally so kind. I have a feeling you would be one of those people who would help me across the street if I were at a busy intersection. She said, the problem I run into is that people tend to do that without asking, and maybe I didn't intend to cross the intersection. I am guilty of that all the time. I am always being helpful to people in ways that don't help. They make me feel better, but they're inappropriate and they make more work for other people.
Mm-hmm.
Ask my kids.
Well, I guess the problematic thing I see is that, like you said, and Mary both, that people assume you need help, and then they help you do that thing that you didn't really need help with, and then they expect you to be have gratitude for it, even though you didn't really need it. So, I mean, there's definitely people in circumstances where there's definite gratitude all the way around, and you'll notice that in me. Like, I will show that appreciation, that gratitude for that situation.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, if that person or those circumstances tend to fall under, like, you owe me for life, or I did this for you, so now you're in my debt, that kind of thing, then that's where the gratitude kind of falls, I think.
Yeah, when it's used as a way of gaining power over another person, then it's very destructive. If it's used out of a place of misled innocence, perhaps, or ignorance, I am able to be thankful for the fact that the other person is compassionate and has a kind heart and sees me as a real human being who needs to have her needs attended to. And I can appreciate that even if the person's made the wrong guess about what he or she should do as a result of the observations. I'm not very good at observing. So, I owe everybody a very good-natured and tolerant reaction to their observations, which may be a little bit off too, or their guesses.
Mm-hmm.
But we live in such an unkind world these days. I'm just grateful for kindness in any form whenever I see it these days. And I have even gotten into the habit of going over to someone who just showed kindness or respect to someone else and saying, thank you for the way you handled that. We need more kindness and respect in our world, and you brought a little bit more into it. So that was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Mandy.
So I have an extension to that, where, people are very caring, and yes, I'm very grateful just the same. And, but while they're learning about your disabilities or learning, how you react to your disabilities, they, tend to assume that it's the same every day or throughout the day, and that it doesn't change, that your abilities, that you're not more able at one point in the day versus another. And it's never the same for me, even beginning of the day versus end of the day. Sometimes it will switch and I'm better at totally different times of the day. And then there's days that I'm not able to do hardly anything, and no matter how hard I push. And so being able to answer and make specific plans for things that are active is difficult. And then I feel like I'm letting people down if I have to say, we planned for this, but I have to say I can't do it, or I need to sit in the car, or I need to just sit back and watch because this is not one of my more capable days. And it's also a disappointment time for me because I want to participate. And sometimes my friends are just glad that I'm there. And it's hard for me to see the switch of, yeah, this is okay for them. They know what I'm like. They're my friends for a reason or whatever. And so thinking that I'm being an imposition in those situations is difficult, but also it's taught me patience in building new relationships with people and being able to be that teacher that says, okay, this is how I would prefer that you handle a situation. This is what this is going to look like. This is what I'd like your response to be. This is the proper type of question that you can ask me, or it's okay for you to ask me questions or for you to ask permission to help. It's not going to insult me if you're checking in and seeing if that's okay. But don't count me out. Let me make my own decisions about things, and don't try to pre-plan for me. Like, oh, well, she won't be able to bowl, or she won't be able to go hike a mountain, or she won't be able to. So I just won't invite her. And then it's like, okay.
Check a box.
Exactly. It's like, please just ask. Because, yeah, I'll probably say, no, I can't do that. But I want to at least be considered. And then there's the other part of, you have the person that overly cares. And so you have this thing where you're treated like a baby. And they're like, I'm going to do everything for you. And overly like compensating for your disabilities to the point that they're even overestimating what your disabilities are. So you're like, with my partial paralysis for my leg, I can walk and everything now. I was in a wheelchair for a long time, and it goes back and forth because I have to have a lot of surgeries. But people would be assuming, well, you can't move anything, so here, I'm going to help you walk down this way and do the forceful walking with somebody. Here's my hand behind your back. Here's my arm. Here's this. It's like, okay, wait a second. Exactly like Court was saying. And if you're pulling me, you're going to pull me off balance. Then we're both down on the ground. That doesn't help anybody. So, but yeah. So anyways, I think I'm done. I'm sorry.
That's actually very useful information.
Thank you.
So let me throw up the first sort of question here and get everyone's feedback on it. To some people, gratitude comes easier when they're in a positive environment and not lacking what they need to be a good person or a contributing member of society. How did you deal with situations like that, and how did it make you feel? Like, typically, I guess the government or whatever, there are certain hoops we have to jump through to get certain accommodations, and that can leave us feeling a certain way about things. Does anyone have anything to say there?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about government, I before I started working full time, I received Social Security, disability, and supplemental security income at different points in my life. And every anybody that's dealt with the Social Security Administration, either for healthcare or for the process, like when you're on any disability, the two disability programs within Social Security Administration, every so often you get a letter that's a very kind of almost like a threatening letter, like you better show up on time. If you don't show up on time, you're going to jerk your benefits away. You might lose your health care. And I've never, ever, ever in any of those meetings started my meeting on time. So they always told me to be there 25 or 20 minutes early in the letter, but I always had to wait 45 minutes to an hour. The other thing that always struck me, and has always struck me, when you go to the Social Security Administration, or at least when I used to, now again, it's been a while since I've had to do this, but when I used to have to go, the first thing you see is a guy that's a cop, security guard with a gun, and you have to take a number. And so that puts you on edge to begin with, because, okay, now here I am, like I feel like I'm being interrogated for just being here. And I'll never forget, I was in college and graduate school, and one of my case managers said, it'll be great when you get a job and you're not a drain on the system. And I just thought, wow, and again, I'm saying this not to say, this experience happened to me. I always say, like, I'm the example in the manual. I was born with cerebral palsy. It's literally in the Social Security manual. That's the person they use. So-and-so has cerebral palsy and they're this age, right? And I got treated that way. I can only imagine what those who have to go through the system who don't have the obvious disability I have, what their experience was and what that experience is like. And, when it comes to, I think there's a difference between having gratitude for individual people who've done things to you. And I think it's difficult to have gratitude for a social program. Don't get me wrong, I'm glad it exists. But the number of hoops that one has to jump through to get a basic amount of health care if they don't have a full-time job, or a basic amount of money so that they can survive. And we're not talking about I think that's tough for people to be grateful when you've gone through that process. And it takes so long. The case managers may or may not treat you as if you're a burden on their very existence.
Right.
And also from the outside, for someone who may not be disabled, it's easy to say, well, you should be grateful for this this system because it's going to be paying for X, Y, and Z. But in the background, they don't understand that the same system that's going to be paying for stuff is asking you to prove that you're disabled. Right? And how that might make you feel.
Yep. So yeah, I just having gone through that process last year. I'd been applying to disability ever since 2019, right after I had that motorhome wreck, because I couldn't see. I was extremely dizzy all the time. I was always nauseous. And, I was a teacher. I can't teach like that. I could hardly form a sentence half the time. I couldn't remember anything. I was having a hard time even doing simple math like 1 + 1. And so how in the world am I going to teach a class of 30 students? And what parent would want me to be the one that has safety responsibility for their child in that sort of situation? So, I got questioned a lot by all the different doctors that I was going to about, why didn't you show up to this appointment on time? And why are you at the wrong appointment? I had memory issues. I forgot where I was driving to. I didn't recognize the areas that I was in. And so then I had to make a schedule with other people that could drive me. because I couldn't remember. They would ask what doctor appointment I was going to, and two of them had the same acronym. And so I would be like, this one's here and the other one's 2 blocks over there. We'll go to one first and then I'll see if I'm at the right one. And then I would get yelled at if I was at the wrong one.
Right.
So then they're like, you took our time, you did this, you did that. And it's like, wait a second, you're my cognitive therapist. You know I have issues with memory. You know that I have issues with all of this processing stuff, and that I have to do this with my schedule, that it takes like 2 hours to get here because of all the steps that I have to go through. And I'm 5 minutes late and you're canceling my appointment.
Yeah.
And like you said, Court, when you have to wait 20 to 30 minutes for an appointment, it's hard to understand why they don't have that understanding for you when you're late by 5 minutes. And so it, and especially it's my cognitive therapist. I mean, so but a lot of the time I run into people that have no personal experience with disability, working with people that have disabilities. And bravo, that's absolutely wonderful. I am so glad that people are trained to do this stuff. But I think there also needs to be a recognition class or something for people that work in these types of situations. Secretaries, people that push the paperwork that you have to talk to, people on the phone. Oh my gosh, the people that set up the phone thing that choose 1 for da-da-da, choose 2, choose 15. What? And so, yeah, sorry, my sense of humor came out there. But so as I said, it's a learning experience in patience. But
Sure.
I always have to sort of stop myself and say, before any of the situations or during any of the situations, I recognize that this is frustrating for you, but also this is where I'm coming from. The majority of the time they don't care where I'm coming from, but it helps to sort of iron things out if I acknowledge their situation first. And so anyway, that was my extension on what you said.
So I have something kind of completely different, a different spin on this, if that's okay.
Yep.
I remember times after my diagnosis when I had left my business career and I was working in various types of nanny, childcare things, which I had done when I was in university and really loved. And most of those were live-in situations, and they were not well compensated. It was just for me to keep busy and to be able to feel that I was contributing. And so oftentimes I was really, in a moment where I was concerned about my future and I was concerned about finances. And so I started doing something called gratitude journaling, and I would do it before I went to sleep at night. And I would just make myself, no matter how the day had been, find 3 specific things that had happened that day that I could feel gratitude for. And it wasn't gratitude to any other person necessarily. It was just more of a self-empowerment process to say, I had this interaction with this particular child, or I really enjoyed this. And I can only say that one of my paths to healing for me was a spiritual path. And I would not call it a religious path, it was a spiritual path. But I discovered that some of those tools, they may seem hokey, but for anyone in any situation, it kind of helps you take your mindset out of feeling disempowered or down and to recognizing what power you do have.
I do think it's also powerful. I like that, and because sometimes we get caught up in, or it's easy to say, I don't have a choice, and there's always a choice. It may not be a great choice or a choice we like. And I think it can get easy to focus on the negative. And so I think taking a moment just to reflect on what good has happened, right? Just to remind yourself that, that there is a lot to be grateful for, even as people with disabilities within a system or a society that's not built for us. And I think that is shows a real sign of maturity, and it takes a lot of work, right? It's not always. It probably wasn't easy on some days to find 3 things that you could be grateful for, but I think that exercise of at least taking stock and saying what I kind of do. I don't do 3 things, but I kind of always ask myself what went right today, right? I also ask myself like what did I do wrong or what went right today, because I have limits, but one of my favorite movies is a sports movie about the runner Steve Prefontaine, who's a runner from the University of Oregon. And in the movie Without Limits, his coach tells him, be thankful for the limits you have. They're about as limitless as they come in this life. And that's something I always try to remember, despite whatever limits I might have. I'm thankful for the limits I do have because they're pretty limitless in some ways. And I have to be thankful for everything I have, my wife, my child, my house, my family, my brothers, my mom and dad that are still living. So I have a lot to be, grateful for. And I think that thing you said just really resonated with me on that powerful, taking that time to reflect and not necessarily making gratitude about a person, but just like finding that positivity in the place where you are.
This was another really difficult topic for us to even approach for several reasons. But on to what you were saying, Court and Mary, because we're definitely have a lot of gratitude and appreciation for the people that came before us and paved the way, and the things that are actually in place, it makes our lives easier. It makes our lives more bearable, right? But there are things that are holding us down and not letting us move forward, and we've got to speak up about them. So while you have gratitude, you got to know where to draw the line and say, hey, I'm absolutely I have gratitude, but these are the issues that are putting a line there. I can't. What do you think about that, Mark?
I mean, go ahead, Mark.
No, go ahead. I didn't really have a finished thought.
I think that I think what you're getting at there is gratitude is not helpful when it's used to obfuscate political issues or structural issues that might be hampering people with disabilities. And I think when gratitude becomes dangerous is when it's like, well, you should be grateful this social service system and Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security exists at all, not then looking at, okay, we're happy that it exists, but how can we make it better? You should be grateful that the Americans with Disabilities Act gives you the access. Okay, but how can we make access better? So I think what you're getting at there is not letting gratitude for the things that exist become an excuse for not pushing to make them better than they are. Right. Sometimes gratitude is used as a political weapon on people who may not be interested in making things better the way they are, and that's not really helpful.
Yes, thank you.
I
When it leads
think,
to complacency.
right.
Yeah.
Like, I think,
Yeah,
we-
I don't think that Mark probably has a lot of gratitude for me today. I've been sick all morning, or it started last night, but yeah, so I'm not much help when it comes to like doing any of the technical stuff usually. So I'm trying though.
yeah, I know you're trying, and I'm grateful you're here. Um, but I was thinking a sort of a complimentary idea to what you were talking about, Court, maybe, is that, the danger we run, again, big caveat here, we should all be grateful, and we're not trying to complain about anything that is given to us and we need, but at the same time, sort of the danger sometimes is when you're grateful for something and then someone or some system or whatever takes that gratitude as
Yeah,
permission to keep doing what they're doing. So,
right.
like,
Or
uh,
not make it better.
right, a good
Or not make it
example,
better.
there are plenty of charities out there which obviously do great work, but there are other ones that are just like tax havens for the rich and just like, don't really do any good for anyone.
Right.
But they do have these big events where they collect a lot of money, and people are supposed to be grateful for that when there's, and basically that gratitude starts a cycle in building up the credibility of this false organization or this false system. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
So I had a weird thing happen this last year. So I was just treated at a hospital here in Oregon and was released for having the total tumor removed. Within a month, I received paperwork from that same hospital asking for me to fund them because we helped you through this. Be grateful to us
Yes.
because you need to help other people heal. And it's like, okay, this is a continuing thing for me, for one. Uh, while I'm grateful for your treatment, it also put me in debt. So, um, it seems sort of backwards to ask for funding from the people that you're designed to help. I mean, I understand that they want to get the word out, and I understand that they feel that the person that has experienced it and has the connection probably would be able to have pity for the other people going through the programs, but it just seems sort of twisted to me. Those sort of alumni programs for the disabled. But the other thing that I was thinking about was accessibility tools that are designed for one disability that can actually make things harder for somebody with another disability. So, one of the things that I ran into when I had a wheelchair was those bumps on the sidewalk cutouts when you're getting ready to cross the street. Now, it was twofold when I was in a wheelchair. It was really nice being able to have that extra assistance to stop. But I didn't have a motorized wheelchair. So then starting again was very hard. And also going up those bumps was very hard. It made it even harder. And then when I had difficulty walking, that was even worse because the entire cutout's covered in those bumps. So I had to somehow fit my feet between the bumps so I wouldn't fall over. And so it, while it sort of helped me in the wheelchair, it really didn't help me in walking. And you know, I imagine it's not that bad for somebody that does not have difficulty walking, but they only started after all of my injuries, so I don't really know. But that's one specific thing that I could think of that uh and the towns that have put in the cutouts on the sidewalk, I'm incredibly grateful to, because there's a lot that still don't have that. And if you're in a wheelchair and you somehow get down onto the main street, or if you have any difficulty lifting a foot in any way to try and get up on a higher surface, if there's no cutouts, then you're stranded and you can't get up there. And it's amazing to me how when I went to a town like that and there was nothing, that you feel completely isolated. But you know, the bumpy cutouts, as well as different types of grooves and things in the streets and everything. But I don't know what other accessibility tools would be like that. That's the only one that just really stood out to me on that.
I would like to speak to the MS Society because that's a long-standing organization that was started by a wealthy woman whose brother had MS and died of complications. So I had known about it for a long time, and I actually was in a support group that was under the auspices of the MS Society at a local hospital. And because I was doing well, the neurological nurse who was in charge of the group suggested that I quit the group because I was upsetting in some way to the other clients. And I found that I really had nowhere to go. And so within the MS Society over the years, just as Mandy said, I get letters all the time soliciting money. And I used to do their walks. I tried to do a bicycle thing, and they said, no, somebody who has MS can't possibly do that, but you can pay us $500, for the privilege of having a team. And I said, no, you don't understand. I want to do it, and I want my friends to sponsor me. And they basically said, well, we don't have a box, as you said, for that. We don't have a box for a person who has this illness who's capable of doing that. And so I became very, very disillusioned. And over the years, I just feel like they've been really slow to pick up on any outlying ideas. They're very much subsidized by pharmaceutical companies. And those are costly treatments and therapies, which I'm glad exist for those people who find they benefit them. But there have been a lot of things that have been sort of widely known in the community. Let me give you an example: vitamin D supplementation. It took them forever, with all of their highly credentialed medical panels, to come to the decision that it would be okay to suggest that people might want to consider taking that. And I just feel that's really preposterous. So I'm completely disillusioned with these organizations because such a small fraction of the money that's raised actually goes to anything that I think is direct help to the people dealing with the illness or any meaningful community. I tried 4 times to join some kind of MS group and pretty much got the same feedback. You guys don't know me, but I'm not really a overbearing, difficult person. I just wanted to be there and share with other people because I do have some experiences and I don't really fit into people who've not had those experiences. But, I guess it's just sad to me that so often those groups are run by well-meaning people who probably haven't actually had a lot of personal experience.
Yeah.
That's
So there's, go ahead, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add, that's a good point, Mary. There are a lot of, while there are really good charities and organizations and programs out there, there are also those government programs and charities that just they don't exist to actually improve and maybe um, get rid of whatever problem they're addressing. They're just they're there to survive just and just not get any better, but just not go away. Just stay there as long as they can.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, chronic illness is a huge source of money for a lot of people.
Right.
And so, unfortunately, the incentive is not there for a person to become well or have a higher quality of living unless that comes through something that directly affects the bottom line of the persons who want it to. So again, I'm not saying that anybody is malicious. I think that just unaware, and you know, a person wants to do something good. Maybe says, "Oh, I have a friend or a relative who is dealing with condition X, and so let me get involved in this." And you know, my experience tells me from before my own experience and then through it, uh, that's not where I'd put my energy. Um, because I think a lot more could be done in other ways.
Right. It is extremely helpful to be able to discern between the situations, the companies, and the personal people, even knowing when they're taking advantage of the situation and when they're genuinely being, you know, helpful and nice. No, they're not trying to take advantage or find a narrative in you. And so if you can discern that, then it's easy to say, okay, I'm not doing that. I'm not going that direction. You do you, I'll do me. And, you know, you make your own environment and have your own group of people, you know.
That's a good point, Crystal. That's a good segue into our next question too. Um, we kind of touched on it before, but where do we draw the line of showing gratitude um and sort of highlighting or shifting people's perspectives and speaking the truth about what really needs to happen to make this organization or the system work?
Well, if you don't mind, I kind of want to touch on that, what we were trying to get at with that. So it's very hard for people who can't be kind and are negative and are taking advantage of disability specifically. It's very hard for you to be able to have, you know, have gratitude in the things, and that's partly why N4G exists. It's because we need to help people internalize what's going on, you know, where how they want to be treated, and how then they're going to treat people how they're treated. And not only that, but the people that have faith and believe in different religions or whatever, they're going to be able to recognize that as well. But if you are always held down and people are treating you negatively, how can you show any of that to other people?
I mean, I think one of the challenges is, too, I think, getting back to the conversation about charities is a good example of this, is what is the motive of the charity? I'm actually teaching a class this semester called Rise of the Crips, and it's a history of disability in the United States. It's a course I've designed looking at disability from a cultural perspective. And the major assignment that the students have to complete at the end is they pick a charity and they have to look at how the disability is actually framed by the charity. Because that tells us a lot of like, well, how are they seeing this? The one I always use as an example is the March of Dimes, right? Does research to prevent birth defects. Their goal is to rid the world of birth defects. That sounds great on the surface, but then if you dig behind that, what you're saying is you're an organization that is trying to rid the world of people with disabilities, because that's what your goal is. And the question becomes, is that something that a charity should be doing, right? That's the goal, right? And how do we have gratitude for it? I think again it is this line of reflecting on the things we have to be grateful for, but realizing things like the charitable industrial complex that exists around people with disabilities may be really helpful, and we can be grateful for certain things, but also may perpetuate a narrative that is also harmful. So it is possible that a charity can do individual good things for people with disabilities on the one hand, and the narrative that charity uses to frame the disability and raise money from its donors can be harmful to people with disabilities on the other. And I think part of the gratitude thing is seeing the concept of gratitude and disability not as an either or proposition, it's good or bad, up or down, but rather a complex reality that we all negotiate. And I think in that complexity, you can find spaces for gratitude and frustration at the same time.
Well, you mentioned there the charity industrial complex, or I can't remember exactly what you said, but I think that one of the things that a lot of people I know who haven't yet had any kind of disability or chronic health problem, mental or physical, are starting to realize, because of what's happened in the last 3 years, is just kind of how broken our system is overall. And that's where we get into the discernment and being assertive and saying, this is not acceptable for anybody, regardless of what their label or conditions may be. Human beings, deserve to have a lot higher level of respect and treatment than we're getting. And as long as we start to look at ourselves as, pragmatically, that at some point in our life, we're going to be in a position where we're going to be consumers of those services, then we can have a different viewpoint on how we would like it to be delivered to us and then delivered to everyone. It's a lot more of us than those executives or charity heads or CEOs that are making those decisions. But up until now, I feel like we've pretty much tolerated what's going on.
Not only on a corporate charity level, but also governments. I mean, like this is I'm from Canada, and we obviously we get paid healthcare here, which we are grateful for. I'm grateful for, and if you're on disability, obviously we get a certain amount of money from the government, which is all great. It's awesome, right? Except that the average amount that anybody on disability earns in this country is around $1,300 to $1,500 a month, right?
Mhm.
And when lockdown was really lockdown due to COVID was at its high point, people were given money because they couldn't work, right? These are your average non-disabled Canadian, and they were given $2,000 a month. So, like on the one hand, obviously we should be grateful, and we are grateful for the money we get, but somebody is trying to tell us that we're not as valuable as every other Canadian. And what are we supposed to do with that information?
There's so much that can be said about that.
Well, I think
Well,
go ahead.
go ahead.
I think, one of the things that, I think it comes to asking deeper questions. For example, when you'll see advertisements for a charity that will say, we were able to procure this veteran a wheelchair or something like that. My question is, like, the deeper question is, why does a charity need to exist to do that? Like, why
Yeah.
does society just provide the veteran the wheelchair based on their disability that veteran might need? So part of it is even asking a deeper question that nobody wants to ask. Like, okay, it's great the charity did that, but why is it so difficult to get a wheelchair for somebody that needs it that a charity has to do it? And I think, like, again, I think asking those kind of deeper questions isn't about we can, again, simultaneously be grateful that they provided this veteran with a wheelchair and ask the question, why does a charity need to provide a veteran with a wheelchair they should probably already have?
Yeah, I don't think anybody who doesn't need a wheelchair is going to try to get one. I mean, it's just what you need. It's a tool, like wearing glasses or, having orthodontics or whatever. It's just what that particular person requires to function. So it definitely should be normalized as a resource that's available to the person who chooses and needs to have it.
What I see a lot of charities doing is they fulfill a need and then they want validation because they did it. But they also gives them permission to share your story and as told by them, not you. And they get to say, I gave them this. So that's another thing I was talking about earlier. You're indebted to them. Mm-hmm. You owe them everything because they helped you. So, like Or was saying, what is the purpose? I mean, I know the purpose of some of the charities. They do some wonderful things, some of them, but others, it's kind of questionable. What they're actual, what they're actually doing.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that, if you go back like 40, 50 years ago, charities were doing a lot more. They seem to be helping out people more on a human level. And actually, now it's gone more the route of they're basically businesses, and they go, like, their top executives go to business schools and learn all these trendy marketing techniques and on how to get the customers money and all this stuff, and the human aspect of it is totally lost.
Now, one of my pet peeves are the galas. And I've been told a number of times, well, we have to have that type of event to get the big donors to come. And I said, well, can't you just speak to this person about what we actually need and, knock off the multi-$1,000 venue and the event? And because to me, it's almost insulting that the individual who's living with the situation is not probably going to be a guest there. They're not hobnobbing at the gala with the person who's the potential donor. And
Right.
so it's, to me, it sort of speaks to how things are out of whack in our society.
Right. Yes. It is a double-edged sword though, because those people in that money definitely affords certain people to be able to do certain things and have certain things that you otherwise would not have. But on the other hand, like I was saying, when they use that as a justification to be able to invalidate the disabled person, that's when it's a problem.
I also think that using children to raise money is something that I was a poster child for the Marching Dimes for 3 years
Yes.
when I was a kid.
Definitely.
And as I had what I call my spiritual awakening with my disability as an adult, I realized that I spent 3 years of my, and look, I was grateful for some of the things the Marching Dimes enabled me to do. I got to do some cool things as a, what they called back then a poster child, what they now call an ambassador, because even they realized the term poster child is probably not great. But what really struck me, and I've always struggled with, is basically my job was as a young person with a disability. I was 7, 8, and 9 years old when I did this. I was to go to these big fancy things in Columbus, Ohio, and convince people to give the March of Dimes money so that they could raise money so no more kids like me would exist. Right? And when I realized that was a struggle for me, because again, like there were aspects of being a poster child. I got to meet Jack Hanna and get a personal tour of the Columbus Zoo and meet Ohio State's football coach. There were aspects of being a poster child. I got to be on TV that I enjoyed, like as a kid. Like, boy, what kid doesn't want to be on TV?
Right.
I realize now as an adult, like I didn't really know what I was doing as a kid, like what my role was in this whole thing. And again, I'm not singling out that this is what I've experienced with the March of Dimes. There's other organizations that use poster children. The Muscular Dystrophy Association has in the past. There's other organizations that have done this historically. But I think using children who may not fully comprehend what their role in the thing is, because they don't fully understand who's behind the narrative, who's behind the framing of the organization, I think is something. I don't want to say we should never use children, but I think it needs to be really, really examined and really, really looked at. For me, that was a big, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. That I was part of that and didn't realize it, and kind of enjoyed doing it at the time I was doing it. It wasn't like, oh my God, I thought it was terrible. I enjoyed it. That's why I did it for 3 years and the opportunities that it afforded me. But when I look at it now, I'm sort of appalled at my role in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, Court. Also, I guess the ultimate irony, other than ambassadors or spokespeople who may have a disability or are put out front to sell whatever to donors, right? Other than that, I don't know if any gala who is courting all these rich people who would allow the actual people they're trying to help in the room. Like if it was a room full of rich people trying to help some people who were disenfranchised and poor, no, they wouldn't let any of those poor people into the room.
That reminds me of the movie The Greatest Showman.
Yeah.
Could you repeat that film title again?
The Greatest Showman.
Oh, The Greatest Showman, right.
Yeah. You remember where they had that big wine tasting thing or gala, whatever it was. Yeah. And they wouldn't let all the different people, the disabled or different people in the room.
But yeah,
they didn't have all the money and they weren't well liked.
Well, I that kind of leads me to say one other thing. I always tell people that the thing that I'm most grateful for in my life was being diagnosed with MS. And I know that sounds weird, but I feel that if it hadn't happened at the time it did, I was going along with my business career and doing things, and I wasn't really happy, and I wasn't really connected to a lot of aspects of myself that I am now. And so for me, it was a form of a wake up call. I'm not saying anybody else needs a wake up call or, it's hard. I'm just framing it from my own perspective. But because of that experience, I I feel that I made the necessary shifts for myself and that I've grown from that. And for certain, I have a whole different perspective on all the other people in the world. It's just, it was, as I say, it was a wake up call. And, I cannot ever comment for any other person about what their life journey is or what happens or when, but whatever happens, I've kind of come to the conclusion that if I can approach it with the, what's the gift in this? Even if the gift is to realize that that is not the way I want to do things, or those people are not really sincere or helpful, that's all part of just an awareness that I think a lot of people go through life in our modern day, pretty much just plugged into whatever they've been taught. And as long as they're able to keep rolling with that narrative and those expectations, they consider their life to be good.
Right. Mark and I have talked a lot about, the gratitude we have for knowing what we know now and being able to discern who we want in our circle and who we don't, because if we weren't disabled, I feel like we'd be on a different trajectory, of course, of, being stuck in a world where you're believing what's going on, and maybe you have a lot less I don't want to get in trouble here. um, you have there's a lot less morals and ethics that are unseen, it's harder for people to see this when you don't experience a disability. You become grateful for the things you can do, and not just you try really hard not to get down about the things you can't do anymore, which is a big thing for Mark and I, because we both have a progressive ataxia. So we're constantly having to move that bar of, but we but we have also been, helped each other be able to maintain and realize where we need to focus, So I think having a disability definitely has its negatives, but for me, it's by far more of a positive thing.
Yep, for me as well. And I'm sure, I'm sure everyone has a lot of, we're grateful for all of you for being here and contributing to this conversation. Sure. Crystal, is there anything else that we want to cover?
I wanted to get to a minute ago. I saw there's a comment. Did you see it?
Oh yeah, I saw it. It was just
Oh,
For Amanda, someone's giving you a thumbs up.
Yay, Amanda.
so we're very grateful for anybody watching as well. And I mean, of course, our guests, but anybody watching and following along with what our conversation was, we appreciate that so much.
I'm really grateful that you guys are so skilled that you know how to put this thing together. Because I'm kind of at the beginning stages of technological ability, and it's such a valuable tool because you literally can reach anybody anywhere at any time. And it's a great gift you're giving to everyone.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me onto the podcast. I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share perspectives that put out there. So definitely appreciate it.
There was one comment that just came in, and
Oh.
I'm sure we can maybe relate it somehow.
You
There,
can throw it up on the screen if you want.
can I? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. So this person is saying, as disabled people just moving around in the world, you're sometimes often gawked at or avoided because you're different, right? And I guess their question is, how can
that bring confidence?
yeah. And I suppose gratitude can help. I don't know. There, right? I don't know.
I think it certainly helps to have that confidence. That often, if you have that confidence in other people around you, like I was saying, you build your environment. And if you have people around you that are positive and, can show you positive things, then you're often positive yourself and more confident in yourself and doing things.
Yeah. And I guess one way of looking at it too is you can also be grateful to those people that are for staring at you and avoiding you, because number one, they're showing you who they really are.
Yes.
For sure.
And I guess that can bring you a sense of confidence. Mandy?
So one thing that I think about when that comes up is the grocery store electric chairs. So the electric wheelchairs that they've got here. If I'm having a really hard time getting around and I'm using one of those, I have been told multiple times that you're young, you can walk, you can just get up and go. And when I use them more often, there are days when I literally can't walk. And right after my knee injury, I couldn't even move my leg on my own. And so I was stuck in this thing. I had a guy stop me and tell me to get out of the wheelchair, that he needed it more than I did, that I was just a young thing that could get up and get around, and was basing it on how I look instead of recognizing that there's a reason that I'm in this thing. I'm not just playing with it like it's a toy. I realize that there are people that do that. And, because I've seen a bunch of kids going around like 3 or 4 stacked up on it and racing through the aisles and things. But you can't look at a person and say, oh, that person's disabled, or that person's not disabled, or this person obviously has this. And you can see the people that are making those judgments. And like you say, it tells you the type of person that they are. So that's something to be grateful for. You also and I'm sort of stuck on the grocery store example, but you also can tell the people that are looking out to help. And so there are people that will notice you looking at the higher shelves and say, "Can I get that for you?" before you even have to ask. And so sometimes when somebody is recognizing that you have a disability or you might need assistance, that brings up a slight amount of confidence that this person might recognize that they can be helpful in that moment. And or if they're avoiding me because of it, it's like, good, they're not one of the people standing in my way. So but no, I'm typically not negative about it. I've gotten to where I don't really notice the looks anymore. It was something that I got used to over time. And you still every once in a while have the thing where you're getting out of a car, you have the disability placard up there, and the people will make those judgments of, oh, they shouldn't be parking there. And those people are like that. It doesn't give or take away my confidence. It may make me feel a little self-conscious for a moment, but it doesn't destroy me as a person to have somebody looking at me that way. And I have to say, when I was first getting used to all the stuff that I'm dealing with, that it did bring my confidence down a bit. But I was working on my self-identity. So now that I'm not defined by disabilities, I have disabilities, they are not me. Then I have confidence in myself and don't have to base my confidence on other people's perceptions. So I may have drifted a little bit, but
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I find that when I'm in a situation like you're talking about, if I dig deeper, I can usually find a deeper truth to share that creates bonds and that is able to maybe educate people. Um, for instance, if I can say something like, I'm very grateful for, and then talk about what I'm grateful for, and then say, I have to be honest, what I'm dealing with is hard. You know, those two truths can exist at the same time. And I think most of us are more comfortable with things being just positive or just negative. But the fact is, there's a lot of intermingling. There really is. Um, I also am constantly on the lookout for, um, in my case, Parkinson's education moments. If I catch somebody looking at me because I'm tremoring, um, I might say, well, looks like I'm having a Parkinson's moment. Better take my meds, that kind of thing. And usually, if I'm just open and cheerful and trustful of their humanity, they usually respond in kind. And an awful lot of times, people will respond with, "You have Parkinson's? Oh, I knew somebody who had Parkinson's," and then they want to discuss that. Um, but I have to sort of use it as a conversational gambit in a way to open communication. Also, there was a question about gawking. And I found myself remembering when I was a young woman and was on a retreat. And there was a middle aged woman also on the retreat. And she had some sort of, I would guess, probably birth defects or something. Her eyes were not lined up with each other. I mean, there was a whole lot going on. Looked like Picasso had created her face. Um, and at the beginning of the time that we were all together, I was trying to figure out how to handle that in a way that was kind and honest. And I really didn't know how to handle it, to tell you the truth, because I didn't want to gawk, but I didn't want to look away. I wanted to see her. Well, fortunately, over the course of the weekend, we did a bunch of exercises together, and this woman chose to remain in a state of deep honesty. And by the end of the weekend, she had taught me with her attitude that she was by far the most beautiful woman there. And at the end, I remember hugging her and looking her in the eyes and thinking, these are beautiful eyes. They are unique in all the world. And I have been blessed by an opportunity to see this radiant woman in all of her beauty and all of the glory that she reflects.
Thank you for sharing that, Anne. Um, any sort of final words or any final thoughts, I guess?
I think it's like I said earlier, it's a difficult thing to talk about, but I think I know in the past, when I first had my disability, I had a lot of struggles and a lot of situations that were difficult, and a lot of people were not really nice to me, not really, and so, I viewed a lot of things negatively, and it wasn't so much, it was me being able to discern what was going right and what people were good and what people were not so good. But when you think about disability, though, and you're told from people that the world is not against you, that most of the time that's not true. I know that. I know the world is not against me, but I can certainly tell in a disability situation where in there, like we've alluded to, so with so many things, so many corporations and companies and things like that, people have failed us. People have negatively viewed us and used us in different ways that are not right. And, that it makes it really hard for us to positively see things unless we're able to take away that negative stuff and only build up a circle of people that don't do that stuff. you know so I think that's another conversation. I mean, of course you have gratitude, but you also have to know where the line is. It's not about being the world's against you, but you have to know where that line is.
That's a good point.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you all
Thank you very much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
So much.
Bye.
Good day.
Bye.